This was a big academic and very pompous introduction, but fortunately for you, I'm not only that, I'm also a practitioner, so someone who is active within civil society, like Center for Cultural Decontamination, board member, or Face of the Street, it's activist organization for printing a journal about art activism distributed through vulnerable groups of society, and many others, even one which uses the term which I hate today, creative mentorship. It's an organization, NGO, that we try to link practitioners with young emerging professionals and so on. But today, this word creative is used for everything but not for what is really creative, that I avoid to use it. Anyway, why I decided to speak about European networks as cultural entrepreneurs in the public realm, although they are considered to be, and they are, civil society organization, but the impact of their work and their importance and values they are promoting are really contributing to the public sphere in culture that is today under severe threat. I'm not going to speak all of that, but you all know what is the kind of competitive society we are living in. Society which imposes to all cultural entrepreneurs to be extremely successful. One of the reasons, by the way, that I'm somehow ashamed to be in front of you as someone that never really succeeded to help development of music, entrepreneurship, management in Serbia. Why? Because you cannot be really successful with contemporary music. You cannot really develop much audience to mean something. We don't have even any kind of music audience outside of music, professional music students, and all my research are unfortunately showing that. So yes, it's not a big deal to make one concert hall full, but that's it. You are going to see also who and why and how can make a big populist events of music. So living in such world, who is in charge to bring a new utopia? Rule of social justice, because there is no social justice, maybe a little bit in the Scandinavian countries, but things are worsening even there. I don't know if you watched the film of Michael Moore, What to Invade Next, and then we could see Finland as a country of social justice where every school is same in the village or in the city. Unfortunately, in most of the countries, even this urban-rural divide, not only class, is extremely still important. So sometimes my students say, you are exaggerating. There is not any more war. There is a war. In our Balkan countries, quite a lot. And you see it here now on the borders of Greece also. Apartheid, they ask me, is that a long story from before South Africa? They only connect this world with this. I say, look at our Palestinian colleagues artists. What kind of life they have, not only in Gaza, but also on the Palestinian, especially occupied territories. Look at the migrations that are happening and the response, not only of EU countries, but also all other countries toward this. Look at the influence and impact of global capitalism on lifestyles, on our art field, and so on, not to speak about all the other issues that you can read. And basically what is the most significant is this lack of social justice. Consequences. Political populism that is spread now throughout the art field, and I see that soon Elia is going to organize a conference about populism in the arts. We had it, arts, culture, and media in the era of populist political communication 2 years ago and printed book about it. speak about embargo, exclusion of different territories. Yes, we need new geographies, but geographies that are not dependent of if we like or dislike certain ruler and so on, because in every country of the world there are humans, there are people, there are also artists. Censorship everywhere. In the West, in the East, it's only depends how it's dealt with. Political censorship, financial censorship. I'm specifically, of course, sensitive, and this kind of censorship is happening in EU countries, like in Hungary, where Orban government dare to question university autonomy and abolished all gender studies department throughout the Hungary, and nothing happens, in spite of the discourse of equity, gender equity, and so on. In my country, they do a lot of financial, for example, this organization, financial censorship. Center for Cultural Decontamination gets zero funding for any, they get Creative Europe, but they don't get any money from City of Belgrade, for example, or from Ministry of Culture. So that's very interesting how this financial censorship can really asphyxiate some small organization. Street censorship. Censorship that stands in front of theaters starting in UK with Bexley, Birmingham, long time ago. But now recently in France, Théâtre de la Colline dared to put Handke on the stage. And Handke, among many of us, let's say, liberal leftist intelligentsia, is not nicely seen due to his certain statement related to war in Yugoslavia and so on. But this kind of boycott, which happens very often due to religious region, for example, for Croatian Meteransen, Oliver Frljić, seems to spread more and more throughout even EU country, not to speak about other. So, commodification of culture, spectacularization, what is brings precarization of artists, of cultural entrepreneurs and workers. And very often we see this word, entrepreneurialism, seen as a panacea, that if we would educate artists to become entrepreneurs, everything is going to change. In fact, when I use this word entrepreneuriat, I think about entrepreneurialism of solidarity, of sharing, that I could experience myself in different European networks, sometimes, sometimes not. For example, my network, ENCAT, stood up in front of the official delegates of Council of Europe when they asked that I should be removed from the board due to the fact that I'm coming from Yugoslavia, in spite of the fact that I was a fighter against the war and against the regime, but any person coming from this country should be boycotted. That was official statement of both EU, Council of Europe, and so on, and my ENCAT network said no. But then later on, when I asked Solidarity within Elia board to support a rector of music academy in Turkmenistan, they said we are not interfering in politics. I said, people, the guy was not doing politics. He was playing Tchaikovsky in American embassy, and somebody denounced him of playing Western music because it became prohibited. I don't even know how much you know about musical situation in Central Asia, because they used to have within Soviet Union very good quality education in music, and then in some of the dictatorship, they had to abolish this Western music that includes Glinka, Tchaikovsky, whoever, and to go to the ethnic instruments only and so on. Anyway, to come back to our, sometimes a network can really be helpful and can help a lot to the institution, organizations, and so on. Sometimes they just say, we don't care. we don't want to interfere. Anyway, this is one very nice piece of drawing of Vahida Ramujkic, Serbian-Bosnian artist, woman artist, done for one of my book about cultural policies, which represents how she sees how things, that there are efforts done by educational and by cultural policies, but general policies of the country would draw it apart. So yes, in a certain way, I'm against entrepreneurialism as an ultimate skill of so-called expanded professionalism in art and culture, because I think that artist has all right to stay artist, not that we ask for him to become entrepreneur. So I think we should revisited the notion of entrepreneurialism, because entrepreneurialism can be part of civic agenda. What you have shown yesterday with this project, it was entrepreneurial. It was ways how, in a transdisciplinary manner, participatory manner, how to make audience more sensitive, more open toward, let's say, new music, contemporary music, that is really, for most of the audiences, especially us, that escaped music school. I really ran away because of solfeggio professor, how it is called, École Buissonnière. I just stopped going without even informing my parents. So it was a big surprise in a family that they are very nice and very super daughter, when she was 9, stopped going to music school. But I didn't like to be humiliated for not having enough talent to become future music professional. I knew that I'm not going to be music professional, but schools in Serbia, music schools, they're only for children that have excessive talent and that to their competitive teachers they can help to get some prizes and so on. So if you're just a kid who would like to learn something to play, you are not interesting, neither for school, neither for professor, and so on. So, responsible society and we as responsible cultural workers, because that's the problem. How to bring this average family, which was not educated in culture, which doesn't have, which is bombarded by different entertainment experiences, and even art became experience economy, entertainment economy, and so on. Do we accept that, or we want to do it in different manner? If you accept that, that's what we get. Probably you know this project from Visual Arts, 2 former Russian artists, now New York artists, Komar and Melamed. They do marketing research in every country of the world where they exhibit, and by the response of the audience, they made the most wanted picture of this country. And you might even recognize American taste, Russian taste, Danish taste, Kenya taste. We can go on further. The only exception in Europe, that's very interesting, is Holland. This is the only country where citizens voted for abstract art. And there are lots of things that we can debate why it is. So, populist cultural politics demands something that is spectacular. So in Serbia, Philharmony, that basically when they have 100 people in the concert room, that's super, organize this Philharmony picnic. And you even see how it is advertised. Not very ecolo. Those cars are parked on grass, plastic or whatever plates, and so on. But our government is delighted with the director of Philharmony, with his managerial, entrepreneurial, and all other skills that he is having. Yes, they can gather 40,000 people for this kind of picnic, but is this really about audience development? None of those 40,000 people is coming then back to the concert halls or to any other music experience. So I'm asking myself, what are new possibilities, and can network offer some other types of platforms. And I think, yes, they offer us possibility to meet across of our borders, not only nation-state borders, but also our mental borders, our stereotypes, and so on. And maybe in this kind of dialogue with so diverse people, we might come up with some new idea, because everyone in our own in our own cultural scene and so on, it's a little bit with stereotypes, with pre-assumption, and so on. And we experts, somehow we are also already in auto-censorship. You can see that if you are watching titles of the projects that compete for any kind of Horizon 2020 we know how, if we want to win the project, if we want to win European money, we know what are the key words and what has to be said and how it should be said. And even, interestingly enough, for some kind of projects, even if they use all these words and so on, it doesn't work that much. And I will tell you one type of projects that rarely gets European money, you can check. It's projects related to Roma with the Roma. So not patronizing projects by elites about Roma, but if you have many Roma organizations within the project, you are not easily going to get European money, foreign money. It's some kind of stereotype, lack of trust, and so on. Anyway, we need solidarity actions, empathy, partnering in collaborative processes that are not always fitting European agendas. So I here find this quotation, which I found very good. Value of networks, we don't have to prove anymore. It is collaboration, not necessarily has to be pan-European. It can be a network of transdiscipline. It can be kind of a ad hoc project network. And those networks are most powerful who are rising organically and so on. If they link people from different communities, creating new platforms, then they're really networks. That's what differs them from association, classical type. You all know Association Européenne des Conservatoires and so on, can be only conservatories and so on. In networks, usually, the possibility to enter can be more free and so on. Those projects often are bringing new ideas and concerns. For example, this project, Auslander-Raus, was what it was, 15 years ago in Vienna. We are now speaking about artistic project for migrant communities and so on. But he did something that in the same time contested populist political communication with reality TV shows and so on, and all this hatred toward the other and so on, this Schlingensief container. Unfortunately, this German artist is dead, but this is something that then spread throughout different kind of sub-artistic networks. So my research questions are really how public role and interest for culture could be defended, because it is under the threat. This public role of culture and cultural activities, as more organizations and institutions are forced to address sponsorship. Of course, you can address sponsorship, but sponsors want spectacles, want big manifestation. They don't want young artists from Belarus, for example, exhibition, or from Benin, or from, I don't know, Cambodia, for example. That's that's an interesting issue. You might lobby for that. Cambodia is the country without EUNIC, because there is only one foreign institute, French institute. No Goethe, no British Council, nobody. Why? Cambodia is not a market. Vietnam is a market. Vietnam is a socialist country, censorship, everyone is there because it's nearly 100 million people, industry and so on. Cambodia 10 to 12 million people, 80% live in the rural area. That means they are not consumers for creative industries, for example. So why British Council would be there? Although it's kingdom, democracy, so-called democracy, same president on the power since 1975. He was Khmer Rouge general and in continue till today. Anyway, this is just to raise a little bit curiosity. So, no, really, because I think what we are lacking curiosity, because curiosity is forcing us to make digressions, to go to another area. So for our career path in contemporary world, maybe it's not that for musicians, but for researchers, they're like, your UDECA numbers are so numerous. You have to have one research area, and then it looks serious and so on, in spite of all transdisciplinary discourses and so on. So we have to enable flows of ideas. And yes, I'm interested in how artists and operators react on the challenges of 21st century, from migrant crisis to global warming, digitalization. I was, by the way, very happy not to hear the words, we are living in the 4.0 industry era and so on, because that type of buzzwords are, how would say, killing, in fact, the real deep thinking about some problem. I'm going to skip this historical approach because you know that probably even better than me, but what I wanted to say, yes, it existed. Networks existed always in history, and yes, networks were facing always saying poor Basile was killed in the French-Prussian War, so he was the core and heart of networking. Not to speak about avant-garde that really introduced what we are lacking today, transdisciplinary network. Only when you look these names down there that were doing several projects together, you can see to what extent this cross-fertilization was famous, not to speak about Russian avant-garde and so on, that could spread throughout the frontiers, even outside of Soviet Union, to come, not only that physically Kandinsky and a few others came to Chagall to the West, but also through journals, through reviews. These kind of, how would say, virtual network in that time spread a lot of ideas and so on. So yes, networks were important in a peace-building process, especially after World War II. But for us, I think it's much more important this second wave of networking that felt spirit of the time. Interestingly enough, if you read literature about network, you are going to read everything about fall of the wall. Like this wall falls somehow. The word perestroika disappeared, which contributed a lot from inside for the wall to fall and things to change. Central Europe as a concept was invented by us in Central Europe. Now I have to say Belgrade is frontier in the Balkans and Central Europe, so we feel our multiple identities belonging to this Central European identity, but also very much specifically related culturally to Central Europe, culturally in sense artistically, but culturally in the way of living to the Balkans. Anyway, we have to rethink why those networks has been created, what kind of solidarity made them to happen, because yes, it was a rise of independent actors in European culture throughout the Europe. So it was not, and it was this flexible, sustainable structure. By the way, one American cultural analyst, Alvin Toffler, in his book in end of 60s, I think, beginning of 70s, we published it in Yugoslavia in 72, Shock of the Future. He has written a lot about this adhocracy that networks are providing and so on. So Networking was a response to a certain necessity of mutual help outside of official circuits, of official public policies, and necessity that each of us, cultural worker, researcher, artist, has to break isolation and to enter in the action, and that's very easy. So Council of Europe very quickly recognized a huge potential. They created this European Forum of Networks in 1993 for Arc-Senan. There was even some declaration. Everything is forgotten. Council of Europe doesn't have money. That means doesn't have any political meaning today. Many networks disappeared. For example, one network that for us in the Balkans was very important, Banlieue d'Europe, disappeared. And it's not very active, although they had antenna in Bucharest, and that was really network that the name is saying, connecting really young, emerging artists, activists, social entrepreneur, and so on. And stimulated a lot of this kind of experiments and innovation. Some networks are very prestigious. Culture Action Europe, Lobby Network in Brussels, and they're there. I mean, now President might be in Budapest, but that's basically that. Some are on the ground. Musiciens Sans Frontières. In Serbia, nobody heard for them, but in many Bosnian cities, the young people wouldn't have any chance of normal life without this organization. So it really depends how and where certain network find a circle of colleagues, friends, individuals that are motivated to do something together. I'm not going to speak a lot about it because, yes, network might be very important for professionalization of certain area. For example, when in 1992 we created NCAT network, there were very few professional academics in cultural management area and so on, not to speak about trainers, and this network helped a lot that standards and even ethics of this profession started to be debated. Sometimes the network is just sectorial alliance that enables cooperation and enables making projects and so on. Sometimes it's a coalition for a success, for career making, for money making and so on. But I would say that the most successful networks are those that are sharing same values, same interest, and that are really ready to act in public interest. For example, network of film producers in my country is really professional association, and they just don't care about anything but success, bigger budget for film in the country, their bigger budget, their big success, and so on. But some other networks of similar kind of producers are totally different and oriented toward development of, for example, in the musical field, for music taste, for musical cultures, for musical education, because in many countries of the world, children are deprived of possibility of music education. When you look Eurostat practitioners, you see that from Austria, Germany onwards, Scandinavia, these are most people in their adult age continue to practice music instrument that they used to learn in school. But going south, Bulgaria, Romania, these newcomers in European Union, you see that there is no practitioner's hobby. The word hobby even doesn't exist. Why? Because people have to do 3, 4, 5 jobs to survive, so no time for hobby. Now, my favorite part of the topic is networking within an alternative scene. What does it mean? It means that, in fact, I will jump to the next slide. Those are networks that regroups subaltern counterpublics. It looks very stressy. The word counterpublic comes from feminist theory because lots of feminist movements succeeded to organize their socio-cultural value chains, ecosystem, like we say today, where only they're publishing, they're performing, their different kind of organization, institutions exist, and that's like parallel reality. In my country, and in the whole region of the Balkans, this is something that was necessary to survive. We had to distance ourselves. We had to create. It took us 5 years, for example, to persuade a very rich guy, Mr. Soros, who would like to give money for projects that there is no way for projects to be realized if he doesn't support infrastructural projects like Rex, Cultural Center of Radio B92, or Center for Cultural Decontamination, and that became the gathering spaces and open studios throughout the Serbia, Bosnia, Kosovo, Macedonia, so that the people can gather, fighting against official policies, and official policies had been nationalism, xenophobia, patriarchal values. That's very official. I mean, that's not something that is embedded. It's going from above. Hatred speech. For example, you can see even in Bosnia, never in my youth time you could see the woman with a scarf in Bosnia, even in remote village. Now, it's pretty, why? Because it's demanded from authorities, from not only from priests of Islamic religion, but even from authorities. So, subaltern cultural counterpublic mostly use different participative artistic practices as the main means of expression. And that was especially practiced throughout the 90s when we had to find a way to express and to be heard. And it was through all different sorts of music that was possible. Music radio activism, for example, was before internet radios very known. Unfortunately, exactly our most rebellious music radio station was both recently, 10 years ago, relatively recently, and from this radio station that we heard all alternative news, now they made playlists, no journalists, no music editors, it's just no person's computer is programming playlist, and audience is listening. And they say that's very commercially successful. Anyway, War Boogie, Vuk Kulenović, he is and was professor in Boston, but he came to Belgrade deliberately. And in the concert hall of classical music, he was led that his War Boogie, that he performed it, because people knew that contemporary classical music is not really audience interesting. Association of Composers made this fantastic event of kneeling to stop the war. Of course, it didn't stop war. This carnival music production lasted for 4 months. When people ask me, like, happy you didn't have lectures 4 months. I said, yeah, but 12 to 3 student protests, we had to walk around the city, 3 to 6 citizen protests walking around the city, and then 9:30, noise making in the neighborhood. You have to go back to your apartment and to make music or noise with whatever instrument to prevent your neighbors to listen public television news. That was for my children, that was the most exciting part of this protest, because we found all these kitchen things to make noise. And then, of course, some more clever neighbors, they put loudspeakers on the windows or on the balconies, and they really did some nasty music and so on. But this was, so basically, And late in the evening, we had our activist meetings and so on. You see here, for example, how it looks in 1992 with this track, Rim Tuti Tuki Camion, with the 3 rock groups that were, and how many people was against the war. By the way, when I went to the Bern Parliament in Switzerland that summer, and I asked why no one in the Western media was writing about in 1992 student protest was 3 months long boycott, so June month was lost for exams and so on. They said to me, we cannot confuse public opinion. There is a good guy, bad guy, and now to say that in Belgrade there are some good guys, that would confuse public opinion, so who cares? Srebrenica Youth Music Theater. Now we all know. For me, the most stressy event in my life was my first seminar with youth in Bosnia in 2002, when 2 girls from Srebrenica were totally like not participating, looking through you empty. And finally, when I tried to discuss, they told me like, that they just, and they've been artists, visual artists, that they just can't even looking others. They might see that in other cities there is kind of a hope, Doboj, Travnik, Mostar, whatever, but in Srebrenica there is none. Every day new refugees coming and then some going because there is no life, no job, no nothing. Then in 2000, I think, 8, I went to Srebrenica with Musiciens Sans Frontières, and everyone in Belgrade asked me, why you are going there? That's a genocide place. But children are living in this place. And for Serbian nationalists, totally incomprehensible now, most of the children in Srebrenica today are Serbian children, refugee from other parts of Bosnia, so also exiled. And they're all so unhappy, and there is such a hatred or survivor Bosnian population. This Serbian population sent there because the government don't care. And they wanted to populate Srebrenica because territorially it belonged to Republic of Srpska, so they wanted to populate it with Serbian population. So everyone who lives there lives under terror, in awful, and the children told me, sometimes they shout on us if we sing, if we dance, but we are living in this city, we have a right to have rock concert here, and they say, no, it's a place of graveyard, you don't have a right to listen loudly music, not to have a rock concert or festival or anything like that. So who might be active there? There is no locally anyone. Only some European networks like this Museum Sans Frontières can go there, raise intercultural sensitivity into totally divided population, like in Mostar population. For example, EU didn't get it. This year was selection for the cultural capital of Europe, and there was Bosnia and Norway mutually competing. I don't know, because it's from the outside EU cultural capital in 2024. And instead to give chance to Mostar, they gave chance to Banja Luka. But then obviously somebody realized that it wouldn't be politically correct that one mono-ethnical city in contemporary Bosnia gets the right to be European cultural capital. So they gave the title to Norwegian city, which has anyway money, capacity, everything. If they want to connect, they can. For Mostar, that could be the only chance to make people cross the bridge that was built by European Union, rebuilt by European Union money, and which, besides tourists, nobody else is crossing. But here, they lacked some networks. Basically, I think networks are really important, or could be important, especially through participative art projects, that civic imagination can go to civic engagement. And that I'm going to jump in to show quickly how it worked with only one artist that developed in Germany lots of projects dealing with negative past. So our Balkan network of Soros Center for former Soros, now Centers for Contemporary Arts, inspired with this counter-monument movement, created also, just to explain or to show you, maybe you don't know, what does counter-monument mean? That's one of the hundreds of counter-monuments that Jochen Gerz was raising throughout Europe. Now some of them are starting to be turned down because, for example, in Graz, when Graz right-wing got power, the first thing to do, but literally 2 days after they stepped in the city hall, they abolished Jochen Gerz memorial that reminds Graz people to their fascist participation, that they were not just victims of fascism, they were actively participated. Here it was a 3-year project, collective production. It was not starting as an idea of Jochen Gerz, it was starting as a research, and students came up after realizing that once upon a time there was 2,146 Jewish graveyards in Germany. Now probably 30. And that memory is lost. There is not even trace of it because there is no population who can keep care of those cemeteries. So they made a project, they collected the name on the cobblestone, they were writing those names of the graveyards, they were putting on this pavement in Saarbrücken back that you cannot see it. So it's anti-whatever monument is, heavy, big, visible, pretentious, and so on. Here you can't see it. But intelligent government of this region in Germany accepted the project when they realized what's going on during night and named this square monument against racism and so on. Networks are here, I think, also to fight, to be very entrepreneurial in redefining European identities. I put it, sorry, in singular, it should be in plural, based on the same value, but however European. Sami people, Sami music started to be integrated just a few years ago. Roma culture, 2 Roma pavilion in Venice Biennial, 2007, 2011. All EU representatives has been on the openings. Council of Europe, European Cultural Foundation, UNESCO, of course. 0 Minister of Culture. All ministers of culture, for example, in 2007, there was Roma artists for 12 European countries, France, Spain, Hungary, Romania, Serbia, Bosnia, etc. No single, even my Minister of Culture from Serbia that I knew by pure chance personally, I asked him, he said, no, I have, exactly in that moment, I have a coffee with the Montenegrin Ministry of Culture. They've been the classmates, acting department of our school. And I said, but come together for the Roma pavilion opening. We have our Serbian artists there. No. And that's the relationship in spite of all discourse of equity. Deliberately yesterday night, that was innovation in this PowerPoint regarding to the first one that I sent, I put this piece because we are in Athens. And because whenever I ask my Greek students what they know about Greek civil war, basically they know that it existed and that it finished. How, why, what were the consequences, no one knows. And what happened to those children, that was thousands of children that were sent in 1949 to Eastern Europe, to Soviet Union, nobody knows. So I wanted to show the painting of Bora Iljovski, the representative in Venice Biennial of Yugoslav Pavilion in 1983, that was born in 42 here in Greece, in Florina, exported as a child to the orphanage in Soviet Union, luckily due to the Tito regime, repatriated in Yugoslavia, but he was not from Yugoslavia, and nobody is interested. The same situation like we in Serbia, we don't have any interest for Germans that we expelled in 1948 from Yugoslavia. If they are artists, if they are this or that, we don't care. Only we cared recently for one that got Oscar for some special effects, and then it was realized, but the guy was born on our territory in Serbia and so on, that we expelled him. Who cares? That's not that important. That's something we have still very many things that we don't speak about. And networks are really the platform to enhance this kind of controversial speech. I have 13 seconds. How to make, and that's difficult. This is supposed to be a participative art project in the center of Belgrade to include citizens and so on, but the very moment citizens approach its Dah theater troupe, when they read Srebrenica, genocide, they run away. They don't beat them, that's already something, that there is no aggression, but they run away. These are also some of the, participative projects done by artists in different site-specific location in Belgrade. Here is this very nice bread and puppet theater, and so on. I will finish a little bit earlier than I thought I will, because time sits up. Networks are the best forms for bottom-up cultural policies. Each of us is lonely and cannot have a strong voice, but network might have a stronger voice and help those who are coming not from that, that many democratic country to be stronger, to hear, to learn, but also to express. I deliberately put this picture, so it's not European network, it's Indian Theatre Forum. Why I thought it's important in this country, without public cultural policy, today with a heavy right-wing government that is really repressing Muslim population and leftist and New York, Jawaharlal Nehru University students and so on, this network is self-organized, learning network through peer learning. It's also advocacy network. It's a huge solidarity network, especially for their theater colleagues of Muslim origin, because the name is revelatory. They act more as Hindi, most of them, than, for example, famous Bollywood actors of Muslim origin that are afraid, and they keep silent on this terror and whatever happening. So, to use Derrida words, an act of hospitality can be only poetic. Thank you.